What's up, guys? My name is Richard. Today I wanted to share 5 proven strategies that have helped me beat impermanent loss. So if we look at my current open position plus closed positions, you could see over the lifetime I have earned roughly $78,000 from yield farming. And basically this versus holding shows that I'm beating impermanent loss by roughly $36,000. So even though the market has been pretty volatile, a lot of assets have been dropping in price, I'm still up roughly $36,000 compared to just holding in the market. And the profit and loss just tracks like the US dollar value when I deposit into the pool and then after I withdraw from the pool. And if I click on only open positions, you can see my open positions are beating impermanent loss by 6,000 something dollars. Right now, I'm in all crypto to crypto pools because with these pools, I'm trying to accumulate more ETH and also more crypto assets. You can see here on my open positions, I'm doing quite well in terms of ETH profit. And I promise you guys, if you use the strategies that I will show you today, you will have a higher chance of beating impermanent loss and making a net profit over time. And the plan is to show you one by one and the examples to support that. So the number one thing that causes people trouble when it comes to impermanent loss is that they set the ranges way too tight. So here, if you look at my SOL to ETH position, you can see my ranges are pretty wide, 0.025 SOL ETH here, and on the max range is 0.0998 SOL ETH. And I entered roughly at 0.06. If we flip this to Ethereum, you can see I'm in a positive divergence loss in terms of ETH, and I'm totally fine with that because my goal is to accumulate more Ethereum. But you can see if I measure the loss, like the price divergence in the dollar terms, I would have been better off just holding Solana and Ethereum separately. That's because my fee is only $700 so far and I incurred about $1,200 of divergence loss. And you can see I'm making roughly $14, $15 per day with this position. So if we take the current negative divergence loss, 530 here, right, divided by 15. So it would take me only about 36 days to beat impermanent loss. So not too bad, but my ranges are much wider than like what people set here. For example, some people set 0.06 here, right, all the way to 0.07. And because Solana has been stronger than Ethereum these couple weeks, they're out of range and probably in much more impermanent loss than I am. So that's the number one thing. The wider your range, like the less impermanent loss you're gonna have. If you look at like longer term pools that I'm in, for example, this Pixel and ETH. So Pixel is a very small cap gaming token that I am bullish on. You can see here I'm in position for roughly 140 days and I've collected roughly $3,700 in fee and only suffered roughly $1,400 of divergence loss. So positive in the dollar terms in terms of impermanent loss and also in really nice Ethereum profit. You can see my range on this one is much higher also, 0.000335 here on the max side and 0.00018 is the current price. If we do some math here, so here the max price divided by the current price. So that's almost like an 18x in terms of Pixel and ETH. So Pixel has to outperform Ethereum by 18 times before I'm knocked out of range. So very wide range. And if you only look at the past like 30 days or 60 days to determine your ranges, a lot of times you're going to be knocked out of range and you're going to be suffering a lot of impermanent loss. So what I like to do instead is to look at the weekly chart for SOL and ETH. The orange line is my top and bottom range, right? The green line is my entry. You could see like if I entered back here in December 2023, I would still be in range today, right? So that's quite a wide range. And even if it exits on the top side, I'm fine with that because I invested Ethereum. And as long as it's above my entry, I'm in Ethereum profit, not even counting the fees, right? And what I see a lot of people do is they look at the past like 30 to 60 days, right? Because they're on the daily time frame, they squeeze the range to something like this or even tighter. But if you zoom out on the weekly chart, you can see how easily these two price ranges could be knocked out of range. So personally, I like to stay in range for at least 6 to 12 months because it allows me to accumulate more fees and it's going to be more likely for me to be in permanent loss. And I'm also free to take profit anytime that's trading above my entry as well. So here is like a drawing I made basically over time. This is the amount and the red line is impermanent loss, right? Let's say I deposit my stolen ETH at 0.06, right? And when price diverges from that, then there's a positive and negative impermanent loss over time. So that's the way you want to think about impermanent loss. And a lot of times it will cross over my entry where I would have zero impermanent loss, right? If we hop back on the chart, you can see I entered roughly here, and maybe in the future it would cross back down at this 0.06 where I would have zero impermanent loss, right? Or if I entered back here in September of last year, I would have had like 2 or 3 touch points here where I would have zero impermanent loss. And if my goal is to beat impermanent loss, right, the tip number 2 is to basically stay in range for a long time. So this is exactly what would happen, right? Impermanent loss kind of fluctuates over time and your fees would accrue over time and eventually it will be impermanent loss. So for liquidity pools, the longer you can stay in the pool, the more likely you are going to be in profit in terms of dollar terms, Ethereum terms, and also impermanent loss. So when you first start out, a lot of times the impermanent loss is going to be greater than your fees. And if you exit during that time, then you would underperform just holding in the market, right? In the SOL to ETH example here, I entered at 0.06, right? You can see it differed by quite a lot, so I incurred much more impermanent loss than if I just held in the market. But like I explained, I'm in Ethereum profit, so I can choose to like close this position anytime, and I would have 1.92 ETH more than what I started out with. So not too bad, roughly 11-12% ROI based on the last 47 days. But it still holds true that like if I stay in this range for a long time, then my fees would be greater than the impermanent loss eventually, right? So that's tip number 2. You want to try to stay in range as long as you can. And it leads me to number 3, which is you want to avoid rebalancing as much as possible. So this is Aerodrome and ETH, a slightly smaller cap token. You can see my entry here at 0.000344. I entered roughly here in February, and obviously it's not ideal, right? It has been trending down against Ethereum, but thankfully I have a wide range. But here you can see it looked like Arrow and ETH was gonna exit my pool on the downside, but because I waited and I didn't rebalance here, then I didn't lock in any impermanent loss, right? So when you rebalance, you're locking in impermanent loss and it's gonna cause you much more impermanent loss over the long term. So a scenario that could get you in trouble is, let's say you provided a tighter range liquidity than I was, right? Like let's say your bottom range was roughly at 0.0003 and top range, maybe you had more conservative top range at roughly 0.0057. But this is what a lot of people do is like when the price exits on the bottom side, right? They want to capture more of the bottom side. So when it exits, you're into all Arrow compared to ETH, right? You're holding 100% Arrow. And let's say the price drops to 0.0002. Some people rebalance like this. It's like they drag the bottom down range all the way down here, and then the top range gets dragged down here. But let's say you entered here, it means you're swapping a lot of your Aerodrome to ETH at a cheap price. And when Arrow recovers, then your Arrow is getting sold into ETH again. And then when it exits the top of the range, you're at a negative Ethereum loss. And if you can help it, you want to try avoiding rebalancing as much as possible. So one exception to this is, let's say I don't make any swaps at all. I want to rebalance, what I would do is I could widen my range, the top and the bottom. And this way, my impermanent loss is actually going to be less as the pair trades in my range. So that's one exception to it. But most of the time, if you can get away with not rebalancing, then you don't want to rebalance, right? So strategy number 4 is to pick correlated pairs. If you're in DeFi for a while, you probably heard of correlation and why it's important, but it's kind of overrated in my opinion, and I will explain why in a second. So correlation is basically if they have a positive correlation, then they're moving together, right? For example, if Bitcoin pumps, then Ethereum is pumping, then that's a positive correlation. And when there's negative correlation here, like for example, Bitcoin and Magic, Bitcoin pumps, and then Magic is dumping, then that's a negative correlation. So usually negative correlation is a pretty bad sign in a crypto market because crypto usually moves together. And the more positive correlation you have, most likely the less divergence loss you're gonna have. So here, Ethereum and Bitcoin, pretty low correlation on the 1 year time frame because Ethereum has been underperforming Bitcoin a lot. And a lot of times when Bitcoin is moving sideways, Ethereum is dropping, so the correlation is much lower. You can see Bitcoin and Solana has much more correlation right now during the 1 year. If we hop to 1 month, Ethereum and Bitcoin is doing okay. But anything above 0.5 is a really good sign, right? For example, Arrow and ETH that I'm in, 0.85, 1 year, 0.66. So that's pretty good. Solana, 0.6. 1 month, 0.73. But here's the thing, I actually lost a lot of money providing liquidity for stuff like Magic and Ethereum because let's say like the correlation is really high, right? 0.91 here on the 1 month, 0.82 here on Ethereum and Magic on the 1 year. But the problem with correlation is that it doesn't show you how much like these tokens move by, right? Let's say Ethereum moves up by 2%. And Magic moves up only by 1%. Technically, it's still like a positive correlation, but let's say Ethereum drops only like 2%, but then when that happens, Magic drops by 10%. That's still a positive correlation, right? And this leads me to the last and final strategy is that you want to check for relative strength. So correlation alone is not enough. So if I pull up the Magic to ETH chart, you can see on the weekly chart, it has been basically bleeding out against Ethereum over the long term. So typically this is something you want to avoid because when you're providing liquidity for like a crypto to crypto pool, usually it's like, let's say Magic and Ethereum, right? Then a lot of times when this token underperform ETH, then my ETH gets converted to more and more Magic. And if I want to exit that position for Ethereum, then I'm at a big negative Ethereum loss, right? And a lot of times when the move is this aggressive, my fees are not going to cover that. So very important to see. You could compare it with Ethereum, compare it with stuff like Solana, right? Compare it with Bitcoin. And you can see this token is not strong at all, right? And if we look at the arrow chart on the USD, it's not too pretty right now. But on the Ethereum chart, you can see there's still a chance of arrow like swinging back up on the top side. And charts like Sol and ETH is pretty great to provide liquidity for because if it's trending up over time, then you're gaining a net ETH over time, even without counting the fees, right? So this is probably one of the most important concepts to understand. Like for example, if I'm providing liquidity for Solana and Bitcoin, if you looked at my last video, that's what I entered on recently. This is the chart that I want to look at when I'm forming my strategy and making my decision, right? I don't want to just only look at the US dollar chart. And Solana has been outperforming Ethereum, and I'm betting that maybe it would outperform Bitcoin again in the mid to short term. So you never know when the outperformance or the underperformance is going to shift, right? For example, ETH and Bitcoin. During the last cycle, Ethereum was very strong compared to Bitcoin, right? But this cycle has been much weaker. But maybe when the Fed cuts the rate, right, we'll see Ethereum reverse against Bitcoin again. But Nobody knows. We'll have to see what the future holds. And the last bonus strategy or tip I have for you guys today is to stop chasing really high APRs. So here for my Sol and ETH position, if the liquidity concentration stays here at this level, I'm earning roughly 24-25% APR, right? So pretty solid. But what a lot of people do is like they're getting greedy, right? They think like, okay, 20% APR is too low. Let me squeeze the range, right? And try to get the most out of it. Like here, if I go here, then I get 150% APR, right? But again, if you look at my previous strategies, right? If you squeeze the range here and the price becomes very volatile, then you might be incurring a lot of impermanent loss. And then when you're rebalancing, you're locking in that loss, right? So my strategy has always been like a wider range strategy, right? If you look at my range here, it's designed to stay in range for a while. And what I'm actually betting on is that this pair is going to be volatile enough that it's going to knock these like high concentration people out of range. And that's exactly what happened, right? I entered at 0.06 and now it's all the way up to 0.081. And this very tight range liquidity would probably get knocked out of range fairly quickly too. And you can see if I move my price range, right, and it goes to like very thin liquidity areas, then I'm getting elevated APR anyway. So I don't need to squeeze my range at all. So that's it for the video, guys. There are some other videos that would probably help with beating impermanent loss, like the rebalancing video, picking ranges, or understanding impermanent loss in general. For example, I talked about like Ethereum profit, US dollar profit, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to make a profit, right? I'm not trying to just beat impermanent loss. And sometimes when there's like a good chance to take profit and I'm at a slight loss compared to holding, I would take that profit any day, right? Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you guys on the next one.